Good day to you. I invite you again to go through this message and receive God's best for your life. David was a young shepherd boy. God picked him up at the age of 17. Then he became the most beloved king of Israel. He became famous after he felled Goliath. And he became king at the age of 30, and things went on very well. He came to the prime of his life. The best days were ahead. But an old story came into his life. His love went toxic. In our brain, there are two tracks, love track or fear track. The love track is energized by a neurochemical transmitter called dopamine. It's a very strong transmitter. When that transmitter begins to work, we get the energy to do the love we feel for someone. And oxytocin is another hormone that floods the brain when we feel loving. And dopamine energizes us to do the loving thing. Sad thing is, even when lust takes over, dopamine has no moral values, it's only a chemical substance. It energizes you in that pursuit of lust. So when lust becomes the tract in your mind because of pornography or whatever it is, it begins to be the dominant track and the default line in which the way the brain works. That is one aspect of toxic love. What happened to David was, he was now a young king. He had conquered most of his enemies, and greater empires were at his feet paying tribute. Spring was the time that a king goes securing his country, but that springtime he did not go with his armies to see that his country is safe. Instead, he languished in his own home, and there was a neighboring lady about whom he had wrong thoughts, and he did a terrible thing. Got her husband killed in the war front, and he took that lady for himself. And there was a baby conceived, but that baby died. Then God accosted David and said, David, you have done this terrible thing. Now, why did love go toxic? What is toxic love? Here are a few features. God has steadfast love. It does not depend on our performance. It comes from God's character. Too much of human love is based on what we do and what the other person deserves. But God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, when we didn't love Him, when we rejected Him, when we denied Him, when we were so prideful and boastful. We had nothing to do with Him. With no expectation of return, God loved us. Now, it is okay to have expectation of return of love. Parents, it's like that. Marriage, it's like that. We expect a return. Our problem is this: our assessment of the return is skewed, and our assessment of what we gave is overestimated. So in all relationships, we feel we gave more, and we judge ourselves, we judge others and say, I got a bad return. That's where expectation of love return becomes love lost, and it works an area of the brain that takes risk. When you have this feeling of love loss, you feel threatened, you feel under siege, you feel your investment was in waste, you feel you were taken for a fool, you were taken for a ride, you were denied, you were betrayed. And this sets off the risk track in your brain. And the risk track works for survival. At that point, a Romeo in 3, 4, 5 days' time can become reckless and ruthless, because all what he gave for love, now he turns for revenge. These are familiar stories. These happen every day in normal life. So we got an understanding of God's steadfast love that does not depend on our performance, but it depends on His character. You remove God out, you are removing the definition of love out. All what human beings go through without God is not love, but it's a consumerist thing. I give to get. That's how the human world goes. That's why we desperately need God in our life, to have an absolute standard of love that does not depend on the beneficiary. It depends on our great benefactor, God our Father in heaven. Love originates from Him. It's steadfast love. According to our performance, it doesn't waver. He doesn't say, you do this, I love you so much. You do a little more, I love you more. No, that's not the love of God. That is human love. God's love is qualitatively the same all the time. It doesn't vary in quantity. That's steadfast love. That's why it's called steadfast love, and in Hebrew it's called chesed. The Bible is full of steadfast love. What is toxic love? It is self-originating. Originates itself. It wants to get back always, and it wants to get back more. It wants to get back more. It's a business investment. It's a foolish thought. You get what you invest. But in many human relationships, marriage, parenting, sadly, we give and expect far more than what we can get, and our assessment of what we gave is always overestimated. And our assessment of what we got is always underestimated. That's where toxicity arises. Now you are getting a picture of toxic love. Now don't project this on anyone else. Think for yourself. Don't put this on your husband. Don't put this on your wife. Don't put this on your child. Don't put this on your father. You think for yourself. How have you been handling love? How have you been manipulating love? Furthermore, God's steadfast love is unwavering. It has no profit motive. All human love is wavering. It has a profit motive. God's love justifies, covers a multitude of sins, which means God does it right for us when we do it wrong for ourselves. You know what human love does? It gives and judges the return. She didn't love me as much as I gave. God's steadfast love is always. Toxic love is opportunistic. Steadfast love of God seeks the good of others. Toxic love seeks your own good. Now don't be upset. We all need the love of God. We got a true assessment now of what we said was love. So even with our children, we sometimes say, I have invested so much in you. I have done so much in you. And I got such a bad return. Few more things about toxic love. It is strong and addictive. Toxic love is craving we have when we don't get right love. So when we have been deprived of love, sometimes from our mother's room, sometimes in our younger days, we look for love and we didn't get, there is a craving that gets, like the appetite, a little perverted. And then we get love from wrong sources. We get toxic touch from impure love, abusive love, and we get into bad relationships. And it becomes a hex when bad relationships, bad returns return all the time. What is a hex? It's an old English word. It means bad returns, inexplicable, invisible, something goes wrong, but it always goes wrong. There's an expectation of going wrong. Jesus Christ on the cross broke this. He became a curse and a public shame hanging on the cross. All bad things that came on us, He took on Himself. This is the bitter cup He drank in the Garden of Gethsemane as a prelude to preparation for the cross, and He said, Father, if it be possible, let this bitter cup, human dregs of how human beings treated each other, in one historic moment on the cross He was going to drink. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, He prepared for it. It was such an agony, sweat mixed with blood, He prepared in the Garden of Gethsemane. He knew this cup was coming. He had to drink it. Good news, when Jesus Christ drank that cup, you and I don't have to drink the same cup. So don't wallow in your failures. Don't wallow in your rejection. Don't wallow in the sad thoughts and the toxic thoughts you have about your father or mother. Because God has provided a way. Blame transfer doesn't help, it only makes it more toxic. You transferring your blame to anyone else doesn't improve you. And you taking a little fig leaf, someone else's character default or fault, to cover our nakedness really doesn't cover us for long. We will look for someone else then, someone else, and the blame transfer goes on without actually securing our safety. Toxic love is putting others on demand that they love us. Toxic love is also when we are so self-centered, loving only ourselves. We can't love our wife or husband. We can't love our children. Toxic love expects more than what we give. What can wash this love? David came to this point when he was accosted, and he sang and composed this famous psalm, Psalm 51. Here it is: have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant compassion, blot out my transgressions. Mercy. This is the sprinkling of God's sweetness when we didn't ask for it. Before we ask, God sprinkles oil on our rough patches, on our cracked up patches, so that we don't injure ourselves anymore. Do you know that this happens all the time? This happens to those who call on His name. This happens to those who reject Him completely. Because God causes the rain to come down and the sun to shine on those who reject Him and those who love Him. But His love is steadfast love. So when we have erred terribly, got wounded in the process, we are bruised and bleeding, competing and fighting, God sprinkles His mercy and prevents us from cracking some more. Secondly, He sends a river. That's called steadfast love. When the love of God comes as a river, streams flowing through our life, every good seed that was buried, every good aspiration you had as a young man, saying, I'll become this, I'll become that, God begins to revive those buried seeds. Your heart is no more fallow ground. Your heart is no more marsh. Your heart is no more hard. The love of God comes soaking. As you are listening, let the love of God come soaking into you. Let the love of God come soaking into you as you are listening. But it's the love of God that comes like a river. That's not all. It gives hope, and you feel springtime coming. Seeds that were once buried begins to wake up, and cords that were once broken now begins to get mended, and you are singing a love song. Music re-enters your life. Color re-enters your life. You come out of depression. That dark black hole is no more there. Now if you are one like that or know someone like that, you can start praying for those people. It's going to change. But that's not all. God has a deep, deep well. It's called abundant compassion. And the Hebrew word is a bit of a tongue-swallowing word, rakameika, rakameika. It means, in our language, we say, I love you from the bottom of my heart. Now, Greeks used to say, I love you from the bottom of my bowels. So there's an old expression saying, from bowels of compassion. But the Hebrews used to say, I love from the bottom of my womb. Womb, yes. So Rakameika is the plural of wombs. So what is David saying? Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant compassion, blot out my transgression. So this love, deep, deep, deep love, it's like love of the wombs goes deep down into us, and there are a record of violated love in our heart. We expected this from our mom, it didn't happen. I thought my father will come in time for my birthday. He came drunk, and he picked up a quarrel with my mother. That violation is deep down in your heart. Many violations like that. Love of God is so deep. His compassions go deep, deep, deep down, healing every bit of estrangement, violation. You can face up to it. I know there are many rooms in your heart. You are not opening it up. There it's barred, and it says no entry. You can't trust yourself ever to open that door. But the love of God comes streaming through every door. Love of God comes streaming through every door. Love of God knows no boundaries, knows no barriers. If He carried the world on His shoulders, He can carry you also. Let this deep compassion of God go deep, deep into your innermost being. As I said, the Hebrews says, out of the bottom of my womb, God loved me. That's deep compassion.